Representative Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary. Just a brief follow-up on the discussion about higher ed. As you had noted, higher ed is constantly evolving, and our schools have constantly evolved over the years. Where 15, 20 years ago, our state system schools didn't offer all the variety of majors that they presently do, and they've kept adding on and on to maintain university status and whatnot. So they have been trying to attract, that's out of that dwindling amount of students that are graduating, they are trying to attract more, while at the same time, our state-related schools have gone to this model of smaller satellite schools that didn't exist 20 years ago and are competing for the same people. Meanwhile, at the state level, $450 million, is that about right for state system, and $100 million more than that, $550 million for our state-related schools, and they're essentially fighting with each other over the same students. So as Secretary of Education and the Deputy Secretary, have you actually had dialogue with them about, is there some way that we can do this? We're funneling $1 billion towards these institutions to beat each other up for the same dwindling amount of kids. So I'm just curious.
It is a conversation that we've had, and specifically working within the state-related, the state system, and community colleges. I can share with you one of the positives that happened as a result of the conversations our Deputy Secretary had engaged with in higher ed. Under our administration, together, we created the cross-articulation agreement, where community college credits were recognized as as a system of continuation into the four-year institutions. Because what was happening at one point in time, if you were leaving a community college and going on to a four-year system and graduating, you were counted as a dropout for the community college. So there was no incentive for a community college to create, an articulation pathway to one of the four-year institutions. Once we created that credit articulation agreement, and the community college and higher ed were both recognized for that graduate, they started working much more closely together. Secondly, as we've been looking at, potential or encouraging potential partnerships with satellite campuses and our state system of higher ed, there's one challenge that has been created over in the past decade, and that was when we started to reduce the funding that went out to the state system and state related institutions. We told them, you need to create a better business or market model for your institution. You need to really start to look differently and attract more students if you want to bring down, your tuition in state, because we can't afford to support this endeavor anymore. And so what they started to do was they started to work to attract more out-of-state and out-of-country students. They started to change their business model to take on a much more broader scope to generate additional revenue, because they knew they weren't getting the revenue from us. So now that over the course of the past 2 years that we've been making these investments, we've been encouraging them to think and act differently as institutions of higher ed.
And I appreciate that, but at the same time, it seems like the state-relateds are also, where you said that most kids graduate in school, I can't remember the percentage.
70%.
70% goes to state system schools. And I've had, out of my 4 daughters, I have 2 have gone to state system, one's gone to a state-related school, depending upon what their majors were. But now those lines seem to be blurred.
Yeah.
And it seems like we just keep throwing money, which is fine. I mean, we're all for funding education, but they're struggling. The state system schools are struggling because of lack of enrollment. I mean, their enrollment's down 20%, and they're losing it to the state-related schools, which we're also funding. And I'm just having trouble figuring out how we fix this.
And Will can share a couple of the specifics.
I'll just say briefly, Representative, that we've been working with the state-related, the state system, community colleges, and we've had 2 discussions at the statewide level here in Harrisburg around how we align to our attainment challenge goals. So the State Board of Education adopted a 60% attainment challenge or attainment goal by 2025. So by 2025, as the Secretary said, over 63% of the jobs will require some type of post-secondary credential. So we've been having having conversations around how we align all the work that we're doing in post-secondary ed to make sure that we get there. We're currently at around 44.7, 45% of Commonwealth residents have a post-secondary credential that has value in the workplace, and we need to be at 63%. And so we've been having these conversations at the statewide level. While the number of high school students who are graduating has decreased, the number of students who are going into post-secondary has increased. So in 2009, around 57% of high school graduates in Pennsylvania went on to post-secondary. Last year, it was just over 60%. And so we see the proportion of students actually increasing. So in real numbers, when you look at the number of high school graduates, in 2009, it was around 139,000. Last year, it was around 119,000. But the difference in students who actually went into post-secondary was 8,000 students. So the high school class is shrinking, but the number of students going into post-secondary. So how do we align those services? And so these are conversations we're engaged at the state level to try and ensure that all publicly supported institutions are pushing in the same direction to make sure we can meet that 2025 goal of 60%.
Thank you. And not only pushing in the same direction, but not beating the crap out of each other in the process. Thank you.